I welcome you all to this session. A very great afternoon today, and it is Friday as well. So I am hoping after the session you will all have a good weekend ahead. I once again thank you all for joining in for today's session, and I am excited for this program as always. Whether it is webinar or a classroom program, I always get excited training and coaching. All right, let's continue with today's session. So on behalf of PUG India and Skill, we welcome you for today's session. We would like to thank PUG India for giving us an opportunity to present in one of the topics, and we hope to continue giving sessions to PUG India, and we request you to stay tuned with PUG India website and keep registering to events like this and more. All right, without any delay further, let's continue with today's session. Okay. A bit about me. My name is Aburaman Karambi, and I am a graduate mechanical engineer. I have over 18 years of experience in the industry, and I've spent a lot of time in project management, and primarily started off as a contract trainee programmer. So I have worked on various technologies, started off with Microsoft, then moved to Java, and then finally I spent more than a decade in Progress alone. So I am currently now associated with Skill for the last 5 years plus, and been training and consulting in the area of OpenEdge and primarily project management. So there has been a change in my career from software development to training and consulting. I am enjoying every bit of it. And today's session is one such session which we try to bring in to give a glimpse of an overview of how you could access progress or a non-progress web services. Simply put, technically we also call them as how do you consume web services published either in progress or in a non-progress environment. You have already been circulated the agenda for today, and the agenda is as you see on the screen. We will talk about 3 things today. We have limitation of time, but we have ensured that you would get enough information to get started back at your work. So most of us are having a challenge now with progress related environment applications, wherein we may have to invariably connect to a system or an application within a client place which is a non-progress platform or maybe even a progress platform. Whichever be the case, it is important that we understand how progress supports the web services. So we have split this into 3 small topics which we will be covering in next 2 hours, and post this session you will also get a PDF document which will be sum up of all the slides here. The slides may not make sense because they are primarily for the instructor, and the detail would be coming in the document which would be available, which will be made available to you via the PUG India website. It will also be available in our website for download. We would be recording this session as well, and we hope to make this available soon after editing is done on YouTube. So stay tuned with PUG India website. You will get information following this program. We hope you enjoy this session, and specifically these 3 topics that we talk about. I will talk about web service in general, give a bit background of web services and some terminology related to web services and how it is used in OpenEdge. And then we'll quickly look into what we call as ABL WSDL documentation, and how do we develop the documentation and use them typically to access that. For that I have chosen a website which offers a free web service, so we could do that. I was trying to connect to Facebook and thought you would be interested in doing that. Facebook or LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I don't get a WSDL Facebook and LinkedIn don't provide that. Facebook does not use WSDL, instead they use REST services. So unfortunately, I will not be talking about REST services today. So Facebook was out and LinkedIn was out. So I have chosen something else today for you to demonstrate, and you can go back and look at that piece of code. The code will also be a part of the document, so you may want to try it out later on when you go back to your work. And then finally, I will show you a piece of code how to access from progress environment, from a progress client environment to a non-progress environment. Having said that, you can do pretty much the same even for the progress environment. So let's see. There are some future webinars also planned with PUG India. Dates have not been finalized yet, and topics are yet to be finalized. But what you see today will be session 1, and there will be another session which you may expect to be published shortly, which would be publishing a web service in progress itself. So you could look at it as two halves. The webinar is of two halves. One is using a web service, either a progress web service or a non-progress web service, the one which we are talking about today. And the second one would be how do we publish the same using your progress application. So that will be another webinar. We hope to come up with that when it is done. As of now, we're working on that. And I think that's pretty much about it. We'll try to wind up with a Q&A session. We hope that we have enough time. In an event we don't answer to your questions, feel free to send out those questions to PUG admin, and you would get a response from us via them on those questions. That was about the agenda for today's session. Right, let's continue with the next slide. Okay. The first one would be, the section would be dealing about introduction to web services terminology, and typically the framework that is used in OpenEdge as well. All right, let's talk about web services. I always like to begin with the definition, and my favorite location for definitions are always Wikipedia. So this is the definition that you see out there. Web services is a method of communication between two electronic devices over network. It is as simple as that. Nothing complicated at all. I also like to call it as M2M, machine-to-machine communication. So this is not new, as those programmers who've been working in other technologies as well. This has been there for long, whether we work in Java or Corba, any other technology, we always have a need to talk to machine. So machine-to-machine communication. So web service typically kind of similar utility that enables one machine to communicate with other machine. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, defines a web service generally as a software system designed to support interoperable machine-to-machine interaction over the network. Which means your machine, if it needs to communicate with another machine within intranet or internet, it could do so by means of a web service. Another definition about that could be this one. The term web services itself refers to the technologies that allows the connections to different machines, for example, or it could be a server or it could be another client. And the services are what you connect to using other web services. So a service is typically an end point of a connection, which means I would connect to, let's say, a server, let's say pugindia.org is the name of the server. And if I connect to that, I can use a web service to make connection, and the service, the name of a service which will be published in that would be the end point of my connection, which means I would use the connection information to connect to the web server, and then finally on the web server there will be a service that will be running to which I would actually connect. So that is also known as the end point of a connection. Okay, so the combination of these, internal or external to an organization, make up what we call as SOA, service-oriented architecture as well. So a simple definition about a web service is it's a method of communication, that's pretty much about it, between two machines It could be electronic device such as handheld device such as a mobile smartphone, or it could be a tab, or it could be a desktop, or it could be a server to server, or anything, any machine that could communicate between these. So this is a general definition of web services. A little more on the web service I would like to talk about. All my teaching, as a matter of fact, that's been in our teaching for most of the programs, we do talk about history. As I say, history makes a lot of sense to us because we need to know why a particular thing or why a particular technology or why a particular concept was developed and what was the need of that hour. So while we know what a web service is, we want to know why would that develop, what was the need for that. So for that reason, you would always see a bit of history in my teaching, and I always like, because fundamentally I believe that if something was invented or discovered, there would have been some business problem. And if there is a business problem, I would like to see if the same thing is aligned to my current problem. And if the answer is yes, that's something which I want to use. And hence, the slide that you see out there is on history. So the web services evolved from the earlier technologies, which typically was used as what we call as remote RPC, remote process call, or ORPC. We have heard of COM, DCOM, so DCOM, or CORBA or Java remote method invocation, RMI. So these are the techniques which was used in other technology to communicate from one machine to another machine. So they were all doing well. There was absolutely no problem. Well, was there? Yes, there were some inherent capability issues with respect to these things. And that's the reason why the web services were intended to solve three main problems that were imposed by the earlier technique such as RPC, ORPC, or Java RMI. And these three problems, as you see, is interoperability, which means from one platform to another platform, we should have a seamless communication, which was not so easy with these guys. You need to have a vendor dependency. So if I have a Java, then I may expect a Java machine, Java virtual machine to be in the other side as well. And sometimes firewall issues are there because the ports are not common. And RPC may run on some port, and DCOM may run on some port, and so on and so forth. So there is a problem with the firewall, and that also imposes threat to use these communication techniques. And finally, the complexity involved in doing machine-to-machine communication, we could also call it as sometimes socket communication. So these three were the key challenges with the earlier technologies, or your way or your approach to communicate from one machine to another machine. A little more insight in next slides that you would see. So interoperability. Earlier distribution systems suffered from interoperability issue because each vendor, as I said, would write their own format for distributing message from one machine to another machine, which means to say that the message formats were not standard. There were no standards that were followed by these. So if I have to develop an application, or I have to develop a communication application between multi applications in an earlier environment, I would actually have to struggle a lot, and I may have to write tons and tons of code to address to that. If you look at the DCOM, for example, they would restrict that it could be used only in a Windows operating system. There's a big problem now. So we cannot really call them as platform independent. So it's kind of forcing the developers to adopt to a technology which is Windows based itself. So that was another problem. And similarly, if you have remote method invocation, which actually bound to Java programming language, so it also expects something similar in the other machine where you try to communicate. So it's kind of cumbersome, when it comes to interoperability of the earlier technologies. Firewall traversal is another problem which we just talked about. And typically what happens is collaboration across the corporation. Today we have a vendor who is an external entity to our organization, or we have a customer who is also an external entity to other organizations. In an olden days, it was done primarily through flat file exchange, and finally the organization would write programs to do these loading and communication stuff. That is again very old technique. That was something which I did way back in early late 90s. So again, those things are all out of fashion because time is an important aspect. So as the moment that vendor ships the material, he would like to notify me, and me means my system. So his system must talk to my system, and which means it's a complete different environment. He has an intranet for himself, and we have an intranet for ourselves. So it's not easy to communicate because my firewall may block their request, and they also run on non-standard port, which means we need to be in synchronized. So their application may be on some port, and my application may be living on some other port. There's an issue, which means I have to shoot to all of them, which is not possible. So that was again one of the issues. So however, web services such as what we talk about today uses HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, as the transferring of information, and most firewalls allow it through the port 80. The default setting for a port for www.something.com would be at port 80. So more or less all companies have exposed their port 80 to be listening only for a web-based request such as HTTP. So which means to say that the technology guys started thinking about it. Why don't we start making use of the common port which is 80, and why don't we, since it is a common port which is accepted worldwide and as default port, it is unlikely that people will change their server port, web server port other than 80, because it's accepted norm now that web server runs on port 80. So they thought, why don't we make the web service as a part of the web server itself, which I think to me makes a lot of sense. So that's how it started off, wherein they started thinking, why don't we use a common port which is port 80, and since port 80 we have web server installed there, why don't we use the same port and the same software which is a web server and use it to transfer our information, which means we use typically the same data, the same channel that we use for HTTP. That was second reasons, which was pretty strong reason for people to go in for what we call as the web service. Finally, the complexity, as you see out here, complexity with respect to some earlier system where but really something that one would have to think when developing an application, especially communication between different organization machines. So the complexity in web services is not that very complex at all. As a matter of fact, it's a developer-friendly service system. We will see today, in less than about 2 hours, you will realize that it's not difficult to talk to another machine which is outside somewhere in a remote location. And I would do that where I don't have any control at all. And the second reason is, again, RMI, COM, this requires a lot of learning curve, Somebody from a Progress background has to learn Java or has to learn Microsoft, and then finally crack the problem and develop such code. So those things are also avoided. Then finally, the learning curve, since it is reduced, it makes a lot more sense for us to go in for web services. So just to sum up, web services history was primarily reason were 3 things: interoperability and complexity, as you see out here, and of course the port. All right, that was about the history of web services and why it came in. So I think that sums up. Web services are here to stay. And I've also talked about web services require what we call a web server, and it is a component of web server. Okay, now the question is, how does web service get implemented in OpenEdge? All right, so OpenEdge also provides services, also provides, let's say, tools and utilities and approaches to implementing web services. So there are 2 things that we could do with that. One is expose our own Progress application to the world, and the second one is consume the world's web services from our Progress application. So today's session we will be talking about the second one, which is consuming an existing web services of an external world into my Progress application. Okay, so a web service again, this is from for an OpenEdge standpoint, would be an application that can be accessed and used over internet or intranet. And the good thing about web service is we just talked about it. It is an industry standards protocol, which means the industry big think tank actually sat together and said, hey, you know what, we need to communicate between a common language, and that's how these protocols came in. There are protocols that we talk about in some time now. I will talk about some terminology on talking about web services. And generally in OpenEdge, we implement web services usually with an app server application. Having said that, there are other ways as well to do that. And pay attention that it requires web servers as well. As I said, since it runs on port 80, web server runs on port 80, we will use the same port and same medium through web server, and our web services will be a part of the web server itself application. All right. So in an OpenEdge, you can do the following. You could create a web service. I just talked about the first one, where you would build ABL application and deploy it on an app server. So let's say like this. Today you have an enterprise which requires a single sign-on for your people to be logging into your organization or your client's organization. So login ID and password it takes. The objective is somebody should be able to successfully sign in if the credentials are right, and should be logged out, should not sign in if the credentials are not right. Now, if you have progress-based application, you don't have to worry about it at all. It's native, so you don't have an issue at all. But what if you have a non-progress-based application within your organization, or a non-progress application external to your organization? That's not possible for someone to again build one more application for login. So I would rather create a login.p for instance, and I would separate my business layer, which is login.p, which typically takes an input of user ID and password, validates against the database server, and returns true or false, or successful sign-on, or an error message to whichever request that comes. And I can implement this via web services, which means multiple devices such as, let's say, a palm top, or such as a pad, a tablet, or such as a smartphone, or a desktop user, or within the network, external network, or from some other website, some customer's website or supplier's website, a web-based system as well. So all these communication would have different interfaces. All of them will separately capture user ID and password, which would be typically UI layer that we call about. And then all of them via web services can request a service called login.p, which in turn will give results such as successful or unsuccessful. So that's what this particular service talks about, where you can create web services. As I said, that would not be a part of today's session. So stay tuned with pugindia.org, and shortly you will get a session on that as well. Now, the second thing that you could do with the Progress application on web services is you can expose existing app server application as web services as well. So your login.p or some reports or some other business rule related, all the .p's, you may have to rewrite some bit of code because you may want to app serverize them. So that technically we call them as app serverizing. So if you have a UI part, that you may want to take the UI part off the business layer and have just an inputs and outputs. You could take something as an input and give a data set, or a pro data set, or a temporary table as an output, or give something else. So you could expose existing system as well. In addition to that, you could also, with OpenEdge, create an interface of your web services and deploy it on web server. That's what we talked about. Let's say I have about 5,000 plus program in my Progress application, of which only 50 to 60 information is required, let's say, pieces of information required by different applications within my organization, outside my organization, so on and so forth. So for that purpose, we could think of app servicing about, let's say, 50 programs amongst this 5,000 and deploy them on the web server as a web service. That's pretty much about it. There is a set of rules, there is a way, steps you do that, and that's, as I said, would be deploying your web services, exposing your program application. That's a different program that will take some time later. Okay, and finally, the last one would be how do we interact using Progress OpenEdge client? How do we interact with the web services, whether it is a Progress web service or a non-Progress web service, the rule saying. So the last one that you see is what we are going to do today. We will try to interact from our client to an exposed web service, which is a non-Progress platform. The same thing will apply true even with the Progress platform. Okay. And let's move on to the next slide. All right, continuing with the previous slide, OpenEdge supports web services which is either based on SOAP, S-O-A-P, the full form is Simple Object Access Protocol, or on REST, R-E-S-T, which is the Representation State Transfer. It's not exactly a protocol, so we don't want to call it as a protocol. So we will, in today's session, will mostly talk about the earlier implementation, which is SOAP. In fact, we would not even use SOAP, but I will talk about SOAP from now, just a few slides away from now. So there are two ways in Progress OpenEdge that we support web services. One is called as SOAP, WSA. Okay. Web Service Adapter, that's what we call as SOAP WSA, and second one is REST. The two techniques Progress supports. Each one has got different way we implement as far as implementation goes. The way they implement is different and the tool that is used is also different. For example, we have what we call as in WSA, we have what we call as, sorry about that, WSA is web service adapter, and the other technique is REST. So what happens is we have a concept that we'll talk about in just a few slides away called as WSDL, which is typically an analyzer. Progress has got an analyzer which analyzes the web services and makes it available for a developer to be used. Similarly, it is for REST, it is different. We do that by means of Progress Developer Studio, also known as PDSOE. So the way you, the development tools are different for WSA and REST, and the components are also different, and management tools, they're kind of same except that one utility where we say WSA man for WSA support and REST man for REST services support. And the type of app server that you set up for both are going to be a little different. That in REST services, mostly state-free is preferred, and we don't have state over and state reset functionality in REST services. So, just to sum up, WSA and REST are two approaches in Progress OpenEdge, using which we can develop and deploy our OpenEdge web services. And there are two services also using which we can access a Progress or a non-Progress application. Okay. So with SOAP and REST, as I said, they are industry standards. Typically, they set rules. I'll show you about SOAP. I have a slide talking about SOAP. They are industry standard with a bit of variation here and there. But having said that, the skeleton does not change. So some subtle changes are there with the standards. And there are enough and more information about SOAP and REST you may find out on the web. So we will not talk about that in this session because that they are all subject by itself. As a matter of fact, web services, today's topic is about 500 pages in OpenEdge documentation. So we are trying to get a very high level information about these in just about 2 hours and a few pages of document. But having said that, I still want to talk a bit about SOAP and what we call as WSDL. So today's session is mostly WSA implementation, and hence the SOAP that you see out there. So it is simple object access protocol. Let's say that it's the basis of enabling application to communicate in a common language, whether in the intranet or intranet. So it doesn't matter whether you use Progress or whether you use Java or whether you use .NET or any Python or any program that you talk about, programming language you talk about. We should not have a problem because we will all use mostly what we call as SOAP, which is a protocol with a set of rules and set of standards which we'll be using. And mostly it will be in XML. So XML is an accepted format now, and hence you can communicate from system to system by means of XML. So SOAP would typically communicate XML format. And the W3C, that is World Wide Web Consortium standard for SOAP, defines that the format of message should be written in such a way that it should be able to be transferred across internet as a request and response, which means you can accept the SOAP request and the SOAP response. So typically you can imagine it to be two XML files, and input would be an XML and output would be an XML file itself. So for those who are not aware of XML, I just want to let you know that they are a markup language, and I will show you in one of the slides where I have a snapshot of how an XML looks like. Simply put, that is a flat file, just like your text file. An XML is a flat file, which is having information about some information, and it follows some set of rules. We also call them as tags. So like you have in XML, you have main tag, what we call as the root tag, the root element, we call them as root element. Then you have child element, and under that you have leaf element. Leaf is the final element, which is the lowest in the XML file. So XML is a standard nomenclature. For a SOAP, the same structure is used but with a different name. We call them as a header, SOAP header, and then we call it also SOAP body. We'll see now in a few slides away from now. So OpenEdge support for web services includes functionality of SOAP processor, which means you can use SOAP messages on behalf of your application. So there are SOAP viewers available in the market, open source SOAP viewer. You can test them. So to check whether your application, you may create an XML file of your choice and send messages using those SOAP viewers. Even Progress has got a SOAP viewer, using which you can send across to a web service and get a response back in a SOAP format. So, and then you can implement that format into your programming. So that was about SOAP, and this is how it looks like if you notice. So this is an XML. Taking out the next one. Okay. So what you see out here, the first one is a root node that we call is SOAP envelope. So SOAP envelope is kind of a root node, which if you notice, root node is envelope to envelope. So this is one XML, which is one SOAP message, if you see. So in which is got envelope, and then you have an header, SOAP header, and we have a SOAP body. SOAP header is optional, and SOAP body, as you can expect, is where your actual message goes in. And what you see out here, they are all tags, they are all XML tags, and header is optional. And typically in the body, if you see that you have information such as custom, there is customer number. So this example is from Progress documentation. There is custom. You also see that XSD, which is schema, XML schema, and the type is integer int, and the value is 3. So like this, you will have SOAP messages which can be read by your program, and you can load them into your timetable or what you call as pro data set or data set, and do your manipulation. So this is what you would actually see as a web service. So this entire piece of information is back and forth communicated from one machine to another machine. So my client would actually talk to a server and say, I need to know the order number placed by one customer, say customer number 2. So I would send out as a SOAP message, and I would actually get the information back in SOAP message saying that this is your details, and that's what this XML file talks about. So this is a typical SOAP message that you see out here, which is three things: SOAP envelope, which is the root element. Then you have SOAP header, which is optional, talks a little more information, need not necessarily talk about data though, and the SOAP body itself. In addition to that, there is the fourth component that could be a part of a SOAP message is SOAP fault. If you have error messages, let's say if I had requested for a customer number 199 which does not exist in the database, so my request would go to the database server and that would in turn return back an error message to me, and that could be a fault, also known as SOAP fault. So you will have one more tag which is not currently visible here because this is a successful message. So typically you'll have one more tag called SOAP fault, and using which and error status handle you can display the error message in getting the response back from the web service call. All right, so that was about SOAP, and next key term we'll talk about is WSDL. Some people like pronouncing it as WSDL. I'm not a fan of saying that though. I always say WSDL. So the full form is Web Services Definition Language. So WSDL, as you see, is another W3C standard. Just like you have a SOAP standard, you have a WSDL standard. Now, what is WSDL? Very simply put, WSDL is a document which contains information about your application. Let us say it is kind of your definition of your application itself. So let us say you have a progress-based application and you want to expose your login.p. So login.p would be a .p which typically can be exposed as a service name called login service, and that would take some have an internal procedure called validate login, for example. So the login.p becomes the port type and the login service name typically, and internal procedure becomes your internal procedure. We call them as port. So port type and port. So when you have published this, now the question is, somebody in Java or even Progress Web Speed, let's say, wishes to pass user ID and password and get the result back. Now the question is, how does he know that what needs to be done? So for that reason, WSDL is created. The WSDL, typically when you deploy your web service, a WSDL is created which has information about your application, information about the web services, and how to call them with the example. The creation of WSDL would vary from product to product and deployment to deployment. Every technology has got their own way of reading through these services and making documentation. Progress also has one. I will take you through today how to create a documentation of WSDL. But for you, just know that this is an XML file again, another XML file. But this has information about your application as to what is the internal procedure, what is the name of the service, and what input does it take, what is the data type, and what temp tables are there, and how do we call them, what is the connection URL you need to give, and what is the port name, and all this information. They're all documentation. So all this information is kept in XML. Okay, and this XML is known as WSDL. So there are rules to make this XML, and hence there is a W3C standard available, using which organization have to make WSDL. With Progress, we can quickly do that using what we call as ProxyGen, and we also can use WSDL Analyzer. So today I will take you through WSDL Analyzer to understand some other web service which is a non-Progress web service. Okay, and it's a document which contains information, as I talked about, how the client should be connecting to this, and typically we call them as consuming service. So if the web services are deployed, you may want the clients to consume the web service, and that's what these documents talk about. So we did talk about information about locating the web services. The location as such would all be mentioned here. Okay. So why would we need We talked about it again, so let's quickly take another round on this topic. Let's say an organization A wishes to allow organization B to access the web services. How will B access the web services? So for that, A will create a WSDL document and share it with them. They will use their technology documentation to find out how to decipher this and how to call your .ps or your Java-based services, whichever. So typically, all the information is given in the WSDL documentation, and we can use ProxyGen tool, which comes as a part of installation with Progress. I'm hoping that we, in one of the future webinars, we will also give you a demonstration on how to publish Progress programs as web services. So that will be an interesting topic as well. So today we'll talk about consuming web services created by a Progress or a non-Progress environment. Another session we hope to talk about how do we create Progress web services and what are the tools. Just that it requires what we call as WSA, Web Services Adapter, which is license based. So we'll see how best we can work around that, work out that, and if things goes well, we should have it soon for the demo. So the next is what we are doing today now is we will try to create a WSDL document or locate a WSDL document and understand how to use that service. This is the purpose of this webinar. Okay. This is how a WSDL looks like. It is again an XML file as you see here, and the top one that you see WSDL description for a Google API. So I just quickly took a snapshot of an API that was available with Google. I wanted to do it with the Facebook. Unfortunately, Facebook uses REST services and they don't have a WSDL. So I have mostly been using WSDL. So I prefer using WSDL. So what you see out there is Google search WSDL. You can locate this, do a Google out. You can locate this. The link is also there in front of you, as you see. You can go to google.com and search for WSDL Google search WSDL. You will get the same link there. So this is how a WSDL look like. Now the problem is I do not understand how to use this. I need something else. For example, if my client gives me take this XML file, this is our WSDL. Now you can call our web service. I am actually lost. If I look at this file, it is very difficult for me to decipher what is the service that I need to call and how do I call, what are the data type, and what input does it take and what output does it take. So this XML file is no good to me. It is no good to me at all because I don't understand anything of it. Now here is where what we talk about WSDL analyzer comes into picture. That's the next thing we'll talk about. We will try now to decipher the WSDL document, that is XML file, WSDL XML file, and using that we will connect to one web service. Okay, so that actually comes to summing up the first topic, that is introduction to web services. Let's quickly take a sum up of this. So the picture is self-explanatory out here. We have a client ABL application code, let's say GUI editor, for example, or a character editor, and they're typically known as consumer. You could also have HTTP client, web client, for example, and you could also have SOAP processor. You can have SOAP messages exchange between the SOAP processor. OpenEdge also has, and there are many other SOAP processing software. So if you notice, the sequence of request and response is 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first one is request the WSDL to the black box that you see out there is web service provider. Let's say that it is for our practice purpose. This will be either Google or whether WYDNE. That's a website that I'll be using today. They are the web service provider. We will use or consume one of those web services. So the request is placed to get the WSDL, and the web server responds back with the WSDL document that we just saw now. And using the document, we would invoke or call respective services, giving the arguments as listed in the WSDL document. And the server responds back to me the output, typically whatever requested service is been called. So this is a sum up of the framework of OpenEdge web services in OpenEdge. All right. With that, we complete the section 1. Now to the section 2, which is an equally interesting topic. Just to sum up what we have done is we talked about web services in general and why web services is helpful. We talked about a bit of history of web services and found out that web services is definitely a good way, especially considering interoperability, complexity, and different ports. So it's definitely one of the good options available considering RMIs and RPCs of olden technique. And then we talked about some of the terminologies in web services. We talked about SOAP, we talked about REST, we did talk about WSA implementation as well. And we also saw how SOAP looks like, and we also saw how a WSDL looks like. SOAP is still easy to at least understand because their data, it just has 3 components, which is SOAP, the header element, the body element, and the envelope itself. Whereas in WSDL, it is not so easy for us to go through the document. Sometimes the document may be really big. So that was about the background of the introduction, just to sum up. Moving on to the next topic, which is how do we generate? We just saw an XML WSDL. How do we generate a WSDL documentation so that we use or consume in our code? So let's do that. Okay. So the first step to that is generating documentation of a WSDL file. The extension would be .WSDL from a URL or from a local file system. Let us say if your customer has given a WSDL file, that XML file, you can pretty much use the same. If you don't have that, no problem. If you have the URL, you can still do that. Okay, let's do that. Keep in mind there is a security requirement that may come in if you are placing requests, so they should allow anonymous access for WSDL, which means they should be publishing it outside. So the first step to do this is generate documentation, so that I try to understand the XML better, the WSDL better, and then after we have generated the document, then I would also take you through a quick review of the document that is created. Try to understand some of the sections of the document which has been created. Okay. All right. So the first thing, generating document of WSDL that is received. So as I said, for today's purpose, I will be using one of the website called cdyn.com, and they have published a weather service, which is weather WS. And the entire URL for the WSDL is given to me. That is right there in front of you. So the entire URL would actually lead me to the WSDL documentation. So if I, let me see that. Okay, I would now go to another screen and say, okay, there you go. I have copied the URL and pasted it on my web browser. So if you notice, this is the URL of the company that is offering us a note of thanks to them, so that I was able to give a demonstration on this particular topic. So a big thanks to cdyn.com for one of the web services that they have exposed. So this is the website which is hosting, this is a web server you could say, which is hosting the service, and the name of the service is this. Weather WS is the name of the service. And the WSDL is located in this particular place, location, question mark till this. And below what you see is your WSDL documentation. I'm scrolling through them. It's not easy to find out what decipher this, so I really would not know. Of course, if we spend time, we would know more. But then, is there an easy way to decipher this? Yes, there is an easy way. We'll do that in some time now. So let's go back to our slide where we copied the URL from. Bring it back here. So I just showed you a WSDL, and now we will try to use a utility called bpro WSDL doc, which is Progress WSDL analyzer, and it resides with your Progress install directory under the bin directory. So we will now do that and supply this particular URL, the WSDL file, this XML file to the analyzer, and I would allow the analyzer to throw me a result. There you go. So typically, what does this tool do? bpro WSDL doc. This generates a set of HTML files that describes the service. So if I need to understand the XML WSDL, it will take me a long time. Instead, I would use the OpenEdge tool, bpro WSDL doc, and with that, I would like to run my analyzer on the WSDL file, and I'm hoping that this would provide me a set of HTML file that describes services. Typically, we call in our language as persistent procedure in Progress, and its operation. Operations in our case in Progress terminology, it will be like your internal procedure, and which means to say that it is like internal procedure within a persistent procedure. So imagine it that you would actually be running one of the service persistently on the server and try to access one of the internal procedures, whichever language it is, doesn't matter. So it's a good analogy to understand. So that particular program, whichever it is Java based or non-Java based, whichever, doesn't matter. Even Progress, as a matter of fact. All of them, you can think of it that you would actually invoke a service which would be a program which runs persistently on the memory there. And in that, you would actually use or consume one of those internal procedures that we can talk about, relate to in our Progress world. So service and operation, the two words that you will see now. So service is like your procedure, and operation is internal procedure. There you go. How do we do that? Is go to bpro WSDL doc, and type in the WSDL URL, which I have copy pasted just now on the browser URL. You have to copy that and then give a directory where you want to create the entire analyzer documents. Let's do that. For that, I will have to switch to Progress command prompt using pro-env. All right, there you go. So let's do that. So as I said, it is the syntax is bpro WSDL doc, which is in bin directory. So I will say bpro WSDL doc. This is the utility name, and I would like to give the WSDL file. This could also be a local file, C:, any of the directories where you have the ws.wsdl file. So either ways, Progress will generate the help file. So let me directly take the URL here. So instead of a file name, I'll give a URL here, and I'm giving a space. And if you see with the space, the next thing that I need to give is the directory where we need to save this. So what we will do is we will try to the weather soap is one of the service that they have exposed, and typically that gives the weather of a city of the United States. So we will try to display it in our Progress editor. So for that, I need to know how to use them. For that, I need to analyze the XML WSDL. So this is the syntax for that. So let's now give a directory d:, I think it is in C:, webinars. Now, let me make my life simple. I'll create another directory in work. Call it as WSDL. Okay, there you go. Copy this and paste it here. Okay, there you go. I've hit enter now, and I'm hoping that something will be created here which is more understandable. There you go. It's gone to the next command prompt, which means documentation written to file the OpenEdge WSDL index.html. Excellent. So let's review. Awesome. We had nothing here. Now we have a lot of things out there. So the XML, that file that was very cumbersome to understand, is been deciphered by our WSDL analyzer called bpro WSDL doc. And the first thing that you need to open there is index.html. So let's open this in Internet Explorer, or I generally use Firefox, so I'll use it in Firefox. Excellent. There you go. See, in an earlier case, if I had to go through that XML file, it would be very, very cumbersome for me to understand that. But I have allowed Progress documentation analyzer, WSDL analyzer, to create document out of the WSDL file. Let me quickly take you through its components. So what you see out there is HTML. So this is the location of this particular WSDL where it is picked up from. And then you have the port type. Port type is the name of the service. As you see here, it is kind of persistent procedure in our environment. And this is what the service name, weather soap is the name of the service, and the data types, as all mentioned here, will come back to data type later. But if I click on the weather soap, it will give me more information about internal procedures that the weather soap has. Isn't that excellent? See, you have the WSDL port and the port name. So port name typically would be the name of the internal procedure here. This is what is the port name, weather soap or weather soap 12. These two are exposed currently. So I have a weather soap service, and within that I have a weather soap internal procedure. And the internal procedure looks like this, something like this. They are also known as operations. So operations typically, sorry, I back up what I said. The operations are internal procedures, and the weather soap was actually the port names. So there are two ports here. The weather soap and weather soap 12 are port names and not internal procedures. Internal procedures are here. They are also known as operations. What you see here is operations. So there are three internal procedures. These are translated by our analyzer. It has translated analyzer for Progress understandable language. So which means I don't know what programming language they have used. I don't really know, but I don't really care. Why? Because my WSDL has transformed that and understood that the document, analyzed it, and given to me in a language that I understand. So it is like your operations are nothing but internal procedures. So if I want to get city by forecast, so I can use internal procedure called get city forecast by zip, which means I have to supply an input of zip number and output I will get as a data set. This data set is nothing but pro data set. It's a group of temp tables or a single table. So I can then use it to display this data set to display in my Progress ABL editor. I can also instead call get city by weather. So which means I now don't have to care about what language that particular web service is written. I don't really care. I just have enough information now to connect to that and do my manipulation. So let's go back to my slide and talk a little more there. Okay. This is just seen, we've seen this document index.html is created. This is the output of that HTML, that index.html. As you notice here, this is a URL where the file was residing, and the navigation, entire navigation would happen from the index.html. That is the first instance you would need to open. So the port type is typically persistent procedure. Weather soap is the port type. They're typically services as you see out here. In this case, weather soap is called as port type, and like OpenEdge persistent procedure. So this would be need to be called when you click on more information on this URL. You will see more information about input and output and so on and so forth. Okay. So when I clicked on the weather soap, we just saw in that HTML page, this is a snapshot of that, wherein you could see that port type is weather soap and you have connection information, which means I have to connect using this information, and these are available internal procedures for me. In just a slide from now, I will show you how we use them. We could go to HTML as well and click on, this is the connection information. The good thing about this is you get all information in the analyzer. See, your connection detail is just here, so you don't have to worry about it. So mandatory is all without the square bracket, which means you have to supply the WSDL location and you have to supply the port name. In this case, the port name would be, the location would be the URL that you see out here, and the port name would be either of these, either Weather Soap or Weather Soap 12. Only these two ports are available, and using this you can connect. So in order to connect to Weather Soap, weather application published by CDINE, we would require these two information, and we'll quickly now connect and show you. How do we connect? Very simple. See here, just copy paste this. An example is given already here. I have two variables defined as handle. One has the reference of the server and one has the reference of the soap. So typically handle, if you look at it. So I am using the statement create server and giving the handle, one of the handle called WebService to that, and using that handle, which is a server handle, I will try to connect, and the two input that I have to give is minus WSDL, all goes with the quotes. The entire thing is a single value. If you notice, internally there is a single quote which is also a string here. So minus WSDL space the entire path, then minus port is port name. In our case it will be Weather Soap. Okay, Weather Soap 12. Yes, this is the one, Weather Soap 12. And this is something which you may find it very interesting because this is something you've been doing in your Progress application. So run procedure name, Weather Soap is the name of the procedure, which is like your service name, and typically persistent procedure. Set this handle, Weather Soap handle, the other handle, not the server handle. So on the server handle, you already have a persistent procedure. You would want to run connect, and then you would want to run the procedure on this particular server handle. So just to decipher, run procedure name, set handle to that on where? On the server, which is where you have connected here. So you would try to run an internal procedure there. And let's see if this is connected. I would like to copy this and come to my editor here and say file new and paste this. As I said, I could have seen the name of the port there is Weather Soap. So give me the port name here as Weather Soap, otherwise this will give me an error. There you go. Let's review. So I have two variables, two handles typically, one for the server and one on the service running some web service there. That's what this is about. So the Weather Soap is the web service which I would like to give a handle to second one, and which I have connected to the server. I hope if I run this, it should not give me any error. So let's run this. I hope the website is up. Yes, looks like. So let me see. Let me suppress the error and do error handling. Errors, okay, and say if error hyphen status colon error. Let me see if not. Then do end. There you go. And I will say message successful. Successfully connected. Connected. That's good. Let me print this as message alert. Sounds good. Shift F2. Syntax check is super. So if I don't have any error in connecting, I hope that I should get this message. Else it should come to the error message. Else do end. Copy the same thing here. If there is a problem, then say connection successful. Shift F2 sounds good. F2. Super. As you see, I have successfully connected from my local client to http://wcfcdine.com and a service by name Weather Soap. This is a web service. So my machine, my client machine, my laptop, Lenovo laptop is now connected to the server. Now I can start running their internal procedures and try to display information such as the weather forecast and stuff like that. I could do that now. So there is one step ahead. So that's as simple as that. So the examples on the WSDL document is very handy. It gives you more example of how to use, for example, get city by forecast, for example. So these are typical sample files, and there's one more example given here. So I would leave you people to explore those things. I would not get more detail into this, but let's try to display get weather forecast and see what happens. Okay, let's go back. I would like to take you back to the presentation. There you go. Okay. So we've just seen we did successfully connect to a third party, which is non-progress. I really don't know what technology they have used to create the web services. It could be an ASP stuff or maybe something else. I really don't know. So, but I was able to successfully connect to their server, and I can start. They have exposed many internal procedures, which I can now start using and implement that in my character or GUI application or my web application. So this slide talks about the port name. Port name is mandatory. You have to expose it because that's what the WSDL says. You can, however, when you create a WSDL documentation, you can say the port name need not be exposed. You can make it an optional argument. In this case, weather application, they expect us to give a port name. So that's what this talks about. So that was about the second thing. Second section is complete now. Just to sum up what we talked about. The second section, we used WSDL analyzer to analyze the WSDL file, which is residing in a remote location, and via the website we were able to use a utility called pprop WSDL doc, which is progress shift WSDL analyzer, and that particular utility helped us to see all the documentation of the WSDL file that we had seen, and using that we successfully connected to the server in progress client. So we've just about done pretty much what was the objective of today's session. Having said that, I want to do a little more. We connected successfully, but we want to know the weather forecast, right? So let's do that. So the last step for today's session would be developing an ABL code which accesses variety of web services and exchanging some simple data. There you go. So we will now see OpenEdge ABL code that we just saw, as a matter of fact, but I will take you through a little more than what you just saw. So what happens is web services is connecting is one part. The second thing is you need to exchange information, and many information could happen by means of what we call as temporary tables in our language, and a standard is data set. So let's do that now. Let's get the entire information in a data set and try to connect to the same website and connect to web service and get information about the weather forecast. So for that I will have to take you through another program, which is just out here. I need to write few more lines of code there. So I will give you explanation about that. Let me switch through the source code that I have created for today's demo for connecting to this application. Let's go to the list, and there you go. I have a .p created for you. Okay, there you go. Let me quickly take you through each of these sections. The first one, I don't have to teach you that. You already know that. It's definition section, wherein you have two handles defined, one for the server and one for the service itself, web service itself. Okay, and then we have defined a temporary table here. So what happens is with the WSDL documentation, I know what is the data set, what will the data set contain. So let me quickly take you through a data set called get weather information result, okay, which is in the documentation. So let's go now to HTML file again, get weather information result. Okay, get weather information result, where is it? Let's take a look at that. Okay. There you go. Okay, this is the get weather information result is one of the data set which gives me here information about get weather information element. Okay, just a second, let me take you through that. Okay. Okay, this is the one. Okay. Go to the home first. Get weather information. I am using a service which is with a description. Okay, which is weather soap. Yes, output data set get. Okay, fine. So it is get weather information. Let me go to that. Get weather information. This is the operation which is an internal procedure. So get weather information, as you see out here, is an internal procedure which will give me an output, which is output parameter, as you see out here, data set. There is nothing but our pro data set, and which can be used for later on display purpose. So I will show you that now. So typically the pro parameter, they say define output parameter data set for get weather information result, which is a data set which talks about this. There are three data types here, as you noticed here: weather ID, description, and picture URL. So using this documentation, I can find out what internal procedure to run in that web service, and what is the input that I need to give, and what is the output that I get. If I get an output as a data set, I need to know further a little more on what is the data type of this data set. Typically it's a temp table or a group of temp table. So that's what talked about. So I read this document, and hence I have created a temporary table in my program which says define temp tables. Weather description, I've given the name, and I have defined the same field with the same name. It's exactly the same. So this must be the same as that you're getting as an output. I don't know what the output is, and hence I have to rely largely on the WSDL documentation analyzer. And hence from that I have derived this. So my temp table definition is done. This is where I would like to store the data that I receive from the web service request. So the result will actually be stored here. So my temp table definition is done, but temp table is not understandable by other languages. Temp table is unique to Progress only. So what Progress has done, or any language has done, they try to communicate the data structure using an object called a data set. So define data set is one of the very advanced stuff which has started off from version 10 onwards, if I'm not wrong. And Progress has got immense capabilities. So if you need to talk to different systems, if you need to give information and share information, data set is the way. And just to sum up for those who are not aware of working with pro data sets, Progress data sets, pro data sets is typically a group of temporary tables. You all know temp tables, no? So you can make one temp table and make a data set out of that, or you can take 3-4 temp tables and draw up relationship between these temp tables and make entire thing as a single data set object, and then transfer this data object to whichever request that comes to your web service if you're exposing it. So I will do the same thing here. So I have defined the data set here, and the syntax is define data set, get weather information result. This is what would be definition typically for the temp table. This is my temp table here. So I am defining a new data set object called get weather information, and I am attaching the temp table. If I have 2-3 temp tables, I would say comma, 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 comma. So that's how it goes. So it's as simple as that. So at this point, I have defined 2 handles, and I have defined a temp table, and I have defined a data set called get weather information result, and I have given weather description as attached the temp table weather description to this data set called get weather information result. It's done now. Now it's time for me to connect to the server. So the next 2 lines talks about that, wherein we say create server and give one of those handles, and with that handle colon connect, give the information of the connection information of WSDL that we just used, which is cdyn.com, and then we have used the port that they have given, which is weather soap. Okay, with this connection should have got established on the server with these 2 lines. When the execution comes to this, it is connected. Then I would then run persistently a procedure called weather soap in that server handle, which is run weather soap, and I'll give another handle on the server handle. So what this does is it runs our, just like our progress, run procedure name persistent set handle. So that's what it does. It runs persistently and on the server. So on the server is by means of the connection we just established. So at this time the procedure must be running now. Now I have the internal procedure running. I can now invoke them. That's what I've done now. I have used one internal procedure called get weather information, which we just saw in the WSDL document, and I am saying run that internal procedure in the handle that I attached earlier to that persistent procedure, and I will give the parameters as requested. It does not request any input. It just requests only output, and the output I am giving the data set object that I have just defined above. So what will happen is when the line gets executed, the web service actually gives me the data set object and puts into the data set object which I have defined in this program, get weather information result. And interestingly, I have already attached one of the temp tables to this. So my temp table must have this information already. So at this time, I must have the temp table up and temp table loaded with the data from that website. So I will now write a small piece of query for each my temp table, weather description, with frame name, some name, and I would like to display weather ID, the description, and picture URL. This is one of those fields that is defined and exposed in the WSDL documentation. So I'm all set now to execute this piece of code. So if I run this, what would happen is my machine would connect to the web server, and that in turn, after successful connection, I should be able to run a service persistently there, which is weather soap in this case, our case. And once that is run persistently, I would like to run an internal procedure which takes an argument, which is an output, a data set. So when that is executed successfully, the data set will be loaded with the data, which is actually the temp table, and I would now display it from the temp table. There you go. Let's do that. I am hitting F2. It's taking some time. Super cool. There you go. I have just established a web service connection to a remote location, cdyn.com. And as you see out there, weather ID is given there, description and picture URL. Isn't that amazing? Let me press a space bar. because this is now in my temporary table and I can do whatever I want to with this information. I may want to show it on a desktop, or I may want to show it in web speed, or whichever be the case. That was something that I wanted to show. Do I have anything else? This is again an output. That is all I have for today's session, ladies and gentlemen. The next session talks about the Q&A. Please use the chat window for your question. Unfortunately, I would request you all to be in the mute only mode, because it may the voice, the information, the voice around may distract others. So I request you to kindly put your question on the chat, and we are good to go for the day. Please share your questions. So just to sum up, while you are thinking of some questions, you may go ahead and post it on the chat. I would like to sum up today's session. We have covered basics, introduction to web services. We have then talked about how to create documentation using WSDL analyzer, and using the documentation we have successfully connected through our progress client and give a demonstration on how to connect to web services. Now this web services is a non-progress web service in the demonstration I have given. It could be a progress-based web services also, doesn't matter whichever be the web service. We need the URL there with the WSDL location, and we need the port name, and of course everything else is known to you already. And finally, we have seen written a piece of code to connect to that and display it on our screen. So that was about this. And next thing, you may expect this document. I have created a document, not the PowerPoint presentation. PowerPoint presentation may not be of much of use to you, but I've created a Word document, a small document that I will be sharing with the PUG India, and then it will also be available in our website. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Manu. Thank you very much for your valuable feedback. We look forward to give more such sessions. There are many. The whole idea is we want the progress developer community to get going and developing new applications. There are great advantage. I am a fan of progress myself. I have worked in many technologies, but then my favorite has always been progress. So as a developer, I want to go home early, and progress is the language that offers me that flexibility. So the great news to you all, in case if you're not aware, Progress has launched developer kit for the universities and colleges, which is a great news for us. I hope they campaign it well, and I would do my bit to teach in the colleges free of cost, so that they start developing applications. And if a few of them get hit, we all have enough opportunity to work. So thank you, Manu, for your valuable feedback. Really nice. Thank you very much, Balaji. I would ideally want to do hands-on to all of you, but unfortunately I have limitation with the time. So thank you. Yes, we will stay tuned with the PUG India website and our website as well, skillglobal.com. So you may find more information about us in our website as well. So keep looking at PUG India and our website. Thank you, Vishwadeep. I see a lot of thanks, but no questions. So, okay. Thank you, Manohar. Thank you very much. Yes, Manohar, go ahead. You can send out an email. You have email here. Alternatively, you can also send me an email. I am just typing in now, raghu@skillglobal.com. Okay. You could also send your questions to PUG India. They would send it to me. I would try my best to answer to your question. Okay. I see a lot of excitement for new piece of information. You can be rest assured we will bring in many more information. Immediately you may expect something on creating web services in progress application itself. Maybe using Proxygen, and we'll also try to do with REST services. Let's see how it goes out. Okay. Yes, you have a question? Okay. You don't have, okay, progress OpenEdge 10, okay. Is there a way, let me check and let you know if you don't have progress OpenEdge 10. You can, for trial purpose, you can always download a trial copy of progress from progress website, which has got a 60 days available trial. You can test your learning there, that's one way. And as far as OpenEdge 10 is concerned, earlier versions app server was there. I need to check whether WSDL is possible. I think it must be, but I don't want to commit because I have not tried myself there, that language. So in that version. So if you want to try, you may try downloading a trial copy and learn for those who want to try. All right. I don't see any further questions, so if there are any questions, do not hesitate to talk to. Thank you all for joining. First of all, once again, on behalf of Progress User Group India and Skill, we would like to thank you all for joining this session. It was my pleasure to be your instructor for today's session. We look forward to many more such presentations in the future. We would also want to thank PUG India for giving us this opportunity and hope to collaborate in future as well on this learning. Let's keep learning and feel free to connect with us for any questions that you may have. Thank you all for your time once again from the entire team here. Thanks all. Thank you. All right, if nobody has any questions, looks like I have completed well in advance. It's about 1.5 hours. I had thought it will go up to 2 hours. So I'll wait for 5 more minutes. Those who want to leave may leave, and those who have questions may feel free to ask me on the chat. All of you, once again, thank you for joining and have a great weekend ahead. Thank God it's Friday.